Hey, everybody. We've been talking about question one on the ballot November 4th quite a lot, but it's time to do an all in one place breakdown on exactly what question one does. And when you vote yes on one to pass voter ID and strengthen and secure our elections, exactly what are you voting for? So we're going to break that down. First of all, top line, the full overview is by voting yes on one, you are voting for voter ID. You're voting to strengthen and secure our elections by ensuring that every voter is required to show proof of identification, whether they vote by absentee or in person. And that's an important distinction because if we passed voter ID just for in person voting, then that leaves out about 40% of the population, the voting population here in Maine, that votes via absentee. So it's important to ensure as we work to strengthen and secure our elections that we're including absentee as well. And that's just what Yes on One does. Now, that means that there are a number of pieces that go into that legislation because necessarily absentee voting has a number of components to it, right? There are multiple ways you can request your absentee ballot. And so it does make changes in a few different ways, and we'll discuss those. But what we're going to discuss right off the bat, and for most of this video, is the ballot question itself. Of course, Secretary of State Shanna Bellows has caused a fair amount of confusion by weaponizing the question, by making it confusing and making it sound like something that's different from what it is. So we're going to read the question and then discuss each component. So I'm going to start by reading the question aloud, and I'm going to have to just my notes because it is a long question, the longest question in Maine ballot question history. So here we go. Do you want to change Maine election laws to eliminate 2 days of absentee voting, prohibit requests for absentee ballots by phone or family members, end ongoing absentee voter status for seniors and people with disabilities, ban prepaid postage on absentee envelopes, limit the number of drop boxes, require voters to show certain photo ID before voting, that is the main point, and make other changes to our elections? So here we go, a minute or two on each of these topics. First up, do you want to change Maine election laws to eliminate 2 days of absentee voting? Look, a lot of the things included in this referendum question are pieces that simplify, streamline, and ensure standardization across the state for our elections. And so by not eliminating 2 days of absentee voting, but by ensuring that absentee voting, the deadline is 1 week prior to the election, we can do a couple things. So first of all, Maine has absentee voting, early in-person voting open 30 days prior to the election. It's a long window. It's a longer window than many other states. New York has, I think, about a week that folks can vote early versus Maine's generous 30 days. Here's the thing that I think folks don't realize is that as soon as absentee ballots arrive at town offices, folks can start voting. And in fact, in 2024, towns started sending out the ballots. They arrived early, and towns started sending out those ballots to folks who'd requested absentee ballots before early voting technically even started. And so that window was and often is longer than 30 days. But by ensuring that the final absentee ballots are requested the Tuesday before the election, we can make sure that even if the mail is slow, right? Think about that. If absentee requests, the final ones are processed on Tuesday before election, that means absentee ballots go out on Tuesday in the mail, and someone receives their absentee ballot several days later. They may sit on it for a day or two and then mail it back if they decide not to drop it off in person. But that timeline ensures that that ballot will arrive back to the town hall in a timely fashion and that it's not going to be received after election day and not count. We want to be sure that every eligible voter is able to vote and that their vote counts. So first of all, ensuring that that deadline is moved to 1 week prior to the election ensures that every voter's voice will be heard. It also makes things a little easier on our town clerks who are very busy preparing for elections. And by moving the deadline to 1 week prior to the election, they have that time dedicated to prepare, to be ready for. Many of them have several polling locations that they have to be ready for. There's a lot of work that goes into these elections, and it ensures that they have the time to get that crucial work done so that the ballot counting is not happening simultaneous with the preparations for the election. So it's a simple change that ensures there's still a very large window of time that folks can early and absentee vote, but it won't be too onerous on our town clerks, and it will ensure that those ballots can get in on time and be counted. So the second piece is prohibit requests for absentee ballots by phone or family member. And the piece of that we've heard a lot about is the phone request. Now, rest assured, every single person that wants to vote absentee will still be able to vote absentee. You can request a ballot online, you can do it in person at City Hall, and you can request a ballot via the mail. Right now, you can, yes, call your town office and you can simply over the phone request a ballot. Now, there's no paper trail, there's no way to verify that you're you, and that will change when we vote yes on one. As I said, you'll still be able to request a ballot online via the mail or in person. And what you can also do is you can call your town office and you can say, can you please send me an absentee ballot request form? Then you can do the back and forth through the mail, but all you have to do to initiate that is a simple phone call to your town hall. So again, the process will remain simple and streamlined. You can request a ballot through the online service, through the snail mail, or in person. This way, we will ensure that everyone who's voting, whether in person or absentee, has to show proof of identification. And to be clear, there's still parameters in the law to ensure that those who need assistance from family or a third party will be able to do so, to ensure that every vote is counted and every voice is heard. Now, end ongoing absentee voter status for seniors and people with disabilities. This is a change to the law within the last year or so. And so let me describe what this is. This ongoing absentee voter status means that someone who is a senior or someone who is disabled is able to currently, this is again a new change to the law, but they are currently able to request an absentee ballot, not just for one election, but ongoing in perpetuity. And so, as you can imagine, this could cause a lot of confusion if someone has moved or died and the voter rolls are not updated. And so, this change to the law simply means we'll revert back to the law that we've had for many years, where every single Maine voter can request a ballot for every single election, but they won't be mailed out in perpetuity. You will have to verify your identification each time, ensuring that ballots aren't mailed out to wrong addresses, out-of-date addresses, someplace that someone is no longer living. So yes on one will ensure that with every election, folks need to verify their identification before those ballots are mailed out, and that they won't be mailed out automatically, which will secure our elections significantly. Ban prepaid postage. This is one. Ban prepaid postage on absentee envelopes. This is one I've heard a fair amount. Listen, most towns aren't putting postage on envelopes, but we should have the same standard across our state. And so there are a few towns that do put on postage. This is a taxpayer expense. It's one that's not required by law, but is simply allowed by law. And by changing that, it will make sure that everyone is following the same standard. And folks can either stamp their envelope themselves or drop it off in a drop box free of charge, which leads me on to limiting the number of drop boxes, that part of the question. Current Maine law says that each municipality may have one drop box. However, there is a provision in the law that allows for exceptions to be made. And so at this point, Portland and Orono have both asked for those exemptions and have been granted them. And so they each have 2 drop boxes, both Portland and Orono. Now, it's not guaranteed in the law, but towns may apply for those exemptions. So again, changing this provision in the law back to having simply each municipality being allowed to have one drop box ensures that everyone is following the same standard and that there's not exceptions granted based on political agendas or any other reasons, but instead ensuring that everyone in our state is following the same rules, securing and strengthening our elections. The second to last provision is, of course, the main point that voters have to show photo ID at the point of voting, whether that is absentee or in person. And of course, with an absentee ballot, when someone requests their absentee ballot, they can either send in a photocopy of their ID or they can simply put in the last digits of their ID into the application so that that ID can be verified. So folks have two options to make it simple, whichever one is best for the person applying for the absentee ballot. And that way we can ensure that both in-person and absentee voting is secure. The last clause of the question, make other changes to our elections, has been, I think, a point of confusion and contention for some folks. I've heard the question, does this mean that the Secretary of State can just change the law however she wants? Does this mean that once this passes, that our election laws can be changed without Maine people's approval? No. Any further changes to Maine's election law would have to go before the legislature. This is perhaps a sneaky way, I would say, of the Secretary of State, again, trying to confuse Maine voters. There is not a way for the Secretary of State to simply change election laws without it going before the legislature. In fact, even rulemaking is routinely done in departments after bills are passed through the legislature. But in this case, even rulemaking has to go before the legislature. So no one can unilaterally change Maine's election laws, including our Secretary of State. That being said, that really is the nuts and bolts of the question. And those are a few of the things that folks have had the most questions on. But the bottom line is this: whether you're part of the 40% or more of Mainers who vote absentee or vote early, that's what I do, I vote early at the town hall, or you vote in person on election day, you'll be held to the same standard, and that is showing proof of identification at the point of voting. 36 other states already have voter ID in place, and Maine is just catching up with the rest of the country as we seek to secure and strengthen our elections. Yes on one is a critical change here in Maine, and it's one that the people of Maine have demanded. 800 volunteers collected over 170,000 signatures to get voter ID on the ballot, and now it's up to Maine people to pass it at the ballot box. This is an initiative that was started by the people, by the grassroots, and it will be by the people, by the grassroots, that it is passed at the end of the day. So as we are about 2 weeks out from election, I would encourage you, talk to the folks within your community. Tell them how important it is that we pass voter ID, and tell them how important it is that they get out to the polls this election. This is an off-year election. It's supposed to be, as off-year elections are, a low turnout election. And that means every single vote really does matter. Now, this year, when you go to your town office or wherever your polling place is, you won't have to show proof of identification in order to vote. But think ahead to 2026, going to vote for our full legislature, going to vote for governor, going to vote for senator, and being required to show your ID at time of voting, just as 36 other states do. Think about that feeling of trust and faith in our election process and knowing that our vote is more secure and that your voice is being heard at the polls. And then, this year, get your friends and family out to vote. Tell them the truth about question one, what it actually does, how it strengthens our elections, how it secures our elections. Make sure they know the facts, not the fiction. And then head to the polls and vote, whether it's early voting, which goes through October 30th, or voting on Election Day, November 4th. It is critical that every single voter gets to the polls and makes their voice heard so that we can pass voter ID and strengthen and secure our elections together.